Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Live Show. Always here 5 days a week, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And of course, if you miss a live show, it's always available. Replay, RotoWire YouTube. During the preseason, we do take Thursdays and Fridays off, so we'll be off the next couple days here, but ready to roll on the weekend. Now, if you've been enjoying the show, certainly would appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe button. If you're on RotoWire YouTube, it definitely helps me, lets the bosses know that it's something that you appreciate, so thank you. And if you consider following me on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL, that'd be awesome as well. I do 5 to 7 player profile threads a week. Haven't got one out yet today, but it'll get out this afternoon. Now, you can draft a fantasy football team with me, and we can do it for charity. We get to hang out on a video call, talk football with each other. To get your chance to win, you've got to use the link that's pinned to my Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL. And if you're going to try to donate and try for this chance to win and draft with me, you've got to do so by Thursday, August 24th. So that deadline's coming up. If you're watching on Wednesday, we got one more day. They could extend the deadline, but I'm not sure of that. Morning, Albert. Anyway, stay tuned to the end of the show. Got Brandon Kravitz of RotoWire coming on. Talk about players he's targeting in his 2023 fantasy football drafts. So we're going to go over players today who are in the 4th round of fantasy drafts. This is like picks 37 through 48. I'll go over kind of the pluses and minuses on these players. I'll definitely give you 3 players I'm targeting. That's the title of the show, 3 players that we're looking at. So first, we start out. I want to give some New England Patriots news first before we talk about Rhamondre Stevenson. In yesterday's practice, Ezekiel Elliott was getting more work in the passing game in practice. So that's just an interesting development. I just don't trust Bill Belichick here. And as I talk about Stevenson in a moment, it's just that over the years, he plays these games with his running backs, and Ezekiel Elliott may be close to the end, but Ezekiel Elliott can still, do what coaches ask, run between the tackles, follow blocks, not explosive anymore. He can catch the ball, not explosive there, but it's something to consider. And that said, here's the one thing I make about Stevenson as I get into him. Now, he's only lost 2 fumbles in 2 years. However, he put the ball on the ground twice 2 years ago, 4 times last year. Bill Belichick doesn't care if the fumble gets recovered or not. He cares if you're a fumbler. And Rhamondre Stevenson could be walking a tightrope here, because if he fumbles, he can be banished quickly, because Elliott would probably be pretty reliable. All right, so now we know Stevenson. Last year, his usage went way up. He only had 210 carries, though, but 5 yards per carry. He had a ridiculous 89 targets. That really sealed his fantasy value. He catches 69. He's over 400 yards. He had over 100 fantasy points as a receiver. So that's a big deal here. But those types of target numbers, those often don't happen. Again, Uncle Ted, good morning. We don't see those target numbers from a running back often. I mean, way, way long ago, those have been around a while. Remember Steven Jackson. And he had, I want to say it was a 90 catch season with the Rams. And everybody was chasing that unicorn for years. Yeah, well, he can catch 70, maybe 80. He never came close again. And Stevenson's 89 targets. Remember, this is a brand new offense. Last year, it was often just dumping the ball off to kind of get the quarterback out of harm's way. RPO-based system this year. Bill O'Brien comes in. I don't think we're going to see anywhere near the volume of passes to the running back. And if Stevenson's only going to get you 210 carries, yet he's going as the RB9. If we see 210 carries and we see 30 catches instead of 69, which, again, the way running backs go, that is a real possibility. Be careful. You're going to need 50 catches out of Stevenson to cash that ADP if he's only getting 210 carries. And again, with those fumbles he had in the last 2 years, Belichick might not want him at the goal line because of the need to protect the football. So we got to be careful of that. But that said, Stevenson's an excellent player. And Belichick, I thought, didn't use him enough. Now, remember down the stretch in that Arizona Monday night game, he did mess up an ankle early, but he was on the field the rest of the season, so he didn't miss games. So I know his receiving yards went down, but he was well enough to be on the field. So that tells me he was well enough to play. So maybe the injury was a problem, or maybe they were just playing a little different as the season went on. Debate that one how you want, but just understand there may have been a reason for the decline in his production down the stretch, but he was seeing plenty of targets over the course of the season. He had at least 4 receptions in 9 games. But here's the thing as a runner, he only had 3 games with 15 or more carries. And in 2 of those games, he went off 161, 172 yards. So we know the upside with Stevenson. But as the RB9, like I said, you have to be very sure he's going to be a heavy part of the receiving game or he's going to see an increase in carries. I don't trust Belichick, as I said earlier. If Stevenson fumbles, he will get banished. I can't risk ADP taking him, although I love the player. Last year, I was in on him before he made the bump past Damian Harris in drafts. I was getting Stevenson as a steal. And then, like in late July, all of a sudden, people caught up, and it was like, oh, Stevenson's going to beat out Harris. And he did. But we had an early beat on that one. All right, let's talk about Deebo Samuel next. So, look, Deebo Samuel again. We remember 2 years ago, it was like 1,800 scrimmage yards. What a mammoth season he had. It was just week after week. He was doing it as a runner. He's doing it as a receiver. And last year, he was still 98th percentile after the catch. And that's between his greatness, Shanahan scheming players into space. That's a perfect marriage there, right? And injuries, though, here's what we got to talk about. That 2021 season where he had the 1,800 scrimmage yards, he didn't miss any games. But we go back to 2020, he missed 9 games. Last year, he missed 4. He does have a bit of an injury history behind him. Again, it's not something that we said we're predicting injuries. We never know, but we do know that he's missed 13 games in the last 3 seasons. So it is something to be cognizant of. Now, here was the problem last year. He only touched the football 98 times in 13 games. And, do the math there. That's less than 8 a game? It's like less than 8 a game. So 8 times 13, 80, and like 104. So less than 8 a game. That's not good. He had 94 targets. So the targets were 7 per game. The touches were less than 8, but he did get 7 targets per game. That was helpful. And the thing was, his yards per reception. He had the great yards after the catch, but the problem was he only ends up with 11.3 yards per reception. So they were getting very short passes. And then the yards he was getting after were great, but the thing was they weren't downfield passes at all. They weren't intermediate passes. It was real short stuff. So the rushing game kind of went away on him too. He still was good as a rusher. Remember, he had 60 yards a carry, a little over 6 2 years ago. He was 5.5 last year. And then he was down to 42 attempts. And in his contract strife going into last year, part of his deal was he didn't want to be used so much as a running back. And then when they got McCaffrey, they really didn't need him there. And so the deal with Deebo Samuel, we know the talent is through the roof. We know he's capable of an 1,800-yard scrimmage season. We know that. But this offense showed, even when they just brought in McCaffrey like midseason, they made it a McCaffrey-centric offense, and they kind of everything else orbited around it. Now, Kittle got a lot of touchdowns, and that really boosted his fantasy value. But the catches and the targets, they weren't that drastically different for Kittle. It was just open more downfield where he got to the end zone more. And, of course, he runs after the catch like a beast, which is beautiful. But, Ayuk gets to his 1,000 yards. But, again, it's peaks and valleys. So, Deebo, I don't know how we're going to get those touches to be more than 8 per game this year, because I think McCaffrey is even more integrated with an offseason to work from Kyle Shanahan. So, and how much do they go up if they do go up? Does he go up to 10 or 11? But we're his draft cost is a little lower than last year, of course. But if we're only getting limited touches, it's problematic because he's still drafted high enough that we're expecting somewhat of a ceiling season, and the touches aren't going to be there. So that's my only concern. Now, if you believe that Shanahan will figure out a way to prioritize Deebo Samuel and get him 15 touches a game, which is almost double what he had last year, it had to be double. At that point, we're looking at the huge ceiling season. But again, right now, I'm very concerned about that. Jerry Jeudy's the next player. And Jerry Jeudy was a very interesting case last year. Now, he played primarily slot. 70% of the time, he was hanging out in the slot. And you'd think that's not a good mesh with Russell Wilson, but Jerry Jeudy ended up with a solid season. And Jerry Jeudy was excellent after the catch, 85th percentile. And, he missed 2 games, so there's that. And he ended up just short of 1,000 yards, but 15 games played, 972, 100 targets. He scored 6 times. So it's a great, really, really strong season. Now, here is the thing. Through week 13, he only topped 65 yards twice. So it wasn't through week 13 like he was lighting it up. He wasn't. Now, he goes off late in the season. Now, here's narrative, right? What caused Jerry Jeudy to go off late in the season? A, did he figure things out? B, did Russell Wilson lean on him more? C, at one point during the end of the season, Nathaniel Hackett was gone. Was it a millstone off the team? Or was it a favorable schedule? And these are all in play. And I don't claim to have the answer here. Or in the fifth one, did Jeudy just break out? Was that his breakout? Because in the end of the season, he has 2 games at 100-plus yards in his last 5. In all 5 of those games, he goes over 73. Those were his best stretch of the season by far. Wasn't even close earlier. And of those games, there was a game against the Rams in there. They were terrible. They were already checked out for the season. There was a game against the Chiefs where they were down, I believe, 24-7 in the second quarter, and the Chiefs kind of switched it off. And then all of a sudden, Jeudy just goes off and erupts. And then there was that crazy Week 18 game against the Chargers where they played their starters. They didn't have to play for anything, and they looked like they were a team that was zombified. And so that's the point. Did Jerry Jeudy just have a perfect storm down the stretch? Or was that who he was going to be all along? And, I always want to say it's somewhere in the middle. Yes, he's a very good player. That schedule situation could not have been better. The 13 weeks before then, it spoke a narrative. That narrative was very good, not a great fantasy player, but he goes off. And everybody's like, he's a wide receiver 1 in the last 5 weeks. Yes, was. Great. He was. Can't argue with it. And, but that said, I don't even know what Sean Payton's going to do here because I have no clue what his plans for the offense are. Jerry Jeudy running out of the slot. If Sean Payton knows something works, he will hammer it, go after it. That's the way he works. So definitely he does that. And is Jerry Jeudy going to be that player? And so, again, I just think there's so much uncertainty around it. And I think that end of the season, we're not paying a huge premium for his end of the season. I don't think he's being drafted in a spot where it's like ridiculous. And I think if he comes anywhere near that end of the season production, obviously he'd be the steal of all steals. But there are other players in that point of the draft, which I'll talk about in a moment, who I like better. They're clear alphas. I believe better quarterback play. I don't trust Russell Wilson. That end of the stretch where Russell did well, I think a lot of that was schedule as well. So, again, we're betting on another year potential decline from Wilson. So I am not overly excited on Jeudy because the factors around him are great. But I'll mention the other receivers later who I do like at that point. If you're drafting Jeudy, of course, like I said, you're drafting him based on what you saw late in the season. You're believing that is who he is. That was his breakout, and that will continue. And Sean Payton will use that as a hammer on defenses. Hey, there's a new way to connect with the experts at RotoWire. The RotoWire Text Insider. You can get exclusive daily content to help you with your draft and your roster decisions throughout the season. Plus, you could text our team directly when you need advice. Here's how to get there. You go to, it's a website, joinsubtext.com/RotoWire. Again, joinsubtext.com/RotoWire. And for more details, and you use the promo code, if you want 20% off, use Jim20. Now, this is supposed to be put after the show into the YouTube, so you want to check it there. It's great. The first 100 subscribers, you get access to my 250 plus pages of player notes. Again, join subtext.com/RotoWire and use the promo code Jim20. All right, here we go. Amari Cooper is next. So Cooper last year had a similar season to his best year, which was 2019 with Dallas. Very close numbers. 1,160 yards last year, 79 catches, scored 9 times. 132 targets, not an insane number of targets. Very productive with those. Now, early in his career, Cooper did have a tag on him that he was injury prone. He's only missed 2 games the last 2 years. So he has been a very healthy and solid performer over the last couple of years. That's been very, very useful. And his yards per target the last 3 years, despite being in Dallas for 2 of those and Cleveland for 1, pretty static, 8.3 to 8.8. So he's kind of carved out that area of the field where he is most useful. Obviously, he'll get deep throws as well. Last year, he did cash in a number of those. He did match his career high of 14.9 yards per reception last year. Now, that career high was set in Oakland in 2015, well before they were in Las Vegas. So, and it was That 14.9 yards per catch that he had both there and with the Raiders a long time ago in 2015, that was more than a yard better than the rest of the season. So last year was really a coming out party, a reemergence for Amari Cooper. Now, when we look at his games, he had 500-yard games, but only one came with Deshaun Watson. And that's going to be where your question comes in here. Now, he was a target hog. There were games where he disappeared, but double digits 7 times. And there were games where Donovan Peoples-Jones would get 8, 9 targets and Cooper would get 2 or 3. That was kind of like weird. But here's where your bet is. Your bet's going to be on what you think Watson is. If you think, as I've said throughout the offseason, if Watson lost the speed of the game for being gone for almost 2 years, that comes back. Then if he's back, Cooper is a definite alpha receiver who runs excellent routes. He can beat press man, zone, not a problem. He can win with crisp routes. That has not changed about his game. Last year, again, he showed the ability to get downfield when needed as well. Watson would, in theory, lean on him as the number one. And I know they want to get Elijah Moore involved, and he definitely has a role. And the next thing we look at here, you get David Njoku, very solid tight end, Donovan Peoples-Jones, but Cooper is an alpha. And that is a player who commands targets because of what he's able to do on the football field. So if you believe that Watson is going to reclaim the speed of the game this year, then you go to Cooper as a number one alpha receiver at a discount price who could beat that 1,160 yards of last season. That is definitely in the range of outcomes. If you believe that Watson at last year, age 27, now 28, if you believe he just completely lost his skill or his ability to play, or whatever the stupid stuff he did just took something out of him, then bet against him, and that's not going to work. I tend to say 28-year-old players just don't lose their talent. You're away from the game. It takes a little time to get that back. The speed of the game thing is real, though. All right. Najee Harris is next. Boy, Twitter starts blowing up. Jaylen Warren, 62-yard touchdown in the preseason game. And people are saying, oh, my goodness, Jaylen Warren's the guy. Maybe. I don't think so. Here's what I want you to know. Now, look, Najee Harris's numbers have not been great the last 2 years. Rookie year, 3.9 yards per carry. We explained that away. Now, Harris is not an elite running back. Let's just get that on the table right now. But he's a very good running back. Now, rookie year, Ben Roethlisberger literally had no arm. Defenses completely compressed the field. They loaded the box, and when they didn't, they were jamming the receivers because they knew Ben couldn't throw the ball. So that the offensive line 2 years ago was still in the state of rebuild. So it still was a line that was starting to get better, but it wasn't very good. So Najee Harris had a ton of work. Now, last year, 3.8 yards per carry. I want to explain this one away. Steelers line's getting better. Defenses still really didn't respect Kenny Pickett. They certainly didn't respect Mitch Trubisky early in the year. But here's what I just learned recently about Najee Harris. Preseason, remember, he had that mysterious foot injury, but the team played him in a preseason game. Well, I guess he's good to go. You're not going to play a guy in preseason if his foot's bad, right? Najee Harris played with a steel plate in his shoe through the week 9 bye. Think about that. He had a steel, you can't bend your foot because of the foot injury. So he was playing with a foot that wasn't working for 9 weeks. On the season, he gets 3.8 yards per carry. We got to give him a pass on it. You have to give him a pass. Now, this year, we'll see what we have. Now, here's the thing. Najee Harris still had a 78th percentile broken tackle rate last year. I mean, think about that. 8 games, week 9 bye, with a steel plate in your shoe, and on the season, you still go 78th percentile broken tackle rate. That is pretty astounding. Now, after the bye, different player. First of all, before the bye, he had a game with 15 and a game with 17 carries, I believe. That was it. The other games were lower because he wasn't right. After the bye, 5 games with more than 20 rushing attempts, or 20 or more. Of course, with the rushing attempts come the rushing yardage. He gets 80 or more yards in 6 of 9 games after the bye. He scored 6 of his 7 touchdowns. So basically, Najee Harris was a much better player after the steel plate was out of his shoe. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt here. The coaching staff shot down the idea that Jaylen Warren was going to be the guy. They shot that down right away. Najee Harris is healthy this year. The offense is going to be healthier. Kenny Pickett did show signs of improvement in the second half. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but with the weapons they have, defenses are not going to be able to just say, all right, we got George Pickens, we got Deontay Johnson, we got Pat Freiermuth with Calvin Austin for a speed option, maybe some slot work from an aging and maybe going downhill, Allen Robinson, but still, defenses can't come in and say, you know what? We dare you to beat us through the air. I don't think that happens. I think defense got to play them straight up. Najee Harris, for the first time in his career, may see a healthy situation to run, and the line keeps getting better. This line is now a good line. And they draft Broderick Jones. And right now, Broderick Jones may not be a starter. They the luxury right now of working. Now, maybe he does week one start. Maybe he does. But the point is this. They've got some depth. The line has really been built well. That's a Pittsburgh thing, right? They really did extremely well. Now, the offense last year, again, Pickett wasn't ready last year. I don't think he should have been a first-round pick, okay? But they built a team around him, and we'll see what happens. But I think Najee, again, no steel plate in the shoe. Defense is probably less focused against him. A little better offensive line. Where you're getting Najee, you're getting him in the third round. Remember, he still had over 300 touches last year. He didn't have the 370 or whatever it was his rookie year, but even with his foot hurt, he had over 300 touches. So I think he is a great value pick for you. Christian Watson's next. Okay, so with Christian Watson, look at it this way. He took the world by storm. We know that. Week 10 to 13, was there a better player? I doubt it. 323 yards, but he scores 7 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown for good measure and 49 yards rushing. So he ends up with like 370 scrimmage yards and 8 touchdowns in a 4-week period. Now, during that time, league started to adjust to him. All of a sudden now, we get past that. Down the stretch, he was seeing 46 to 49 yards per game, and he didn't score in the last 4 games. And so now when we look at that, defense has said, okay, this guy's got ridiculous speed. We'll put somebody over the top like we do for Jamar Chase and the other speedsters in the league, and we're going to limit the big plays. Christian Watson was still decent, but he wasn't the guy we saw earlier. And here's the thing. Christian Watson has elite speed, but the knock on him coming into the league was short and intermediate route running. And if he has not made a major jump in that area, because he was winning on deep balls, and then, well, also you got to add this in. If you give him the ball short and he runs after the catch, he's ridiculous there too. He's such good speed, right? So that's another part of his game that he has. Remember, we saw that in the Philadelphia game with Jordan Love. Short pass, and he just took it to the house. So we've got that, right? And but that said, the short and intermediate route running, those are the bread and butter for running backs once the over-the-top game is taken away. And then, of course, we have the drop-off from Aaron Rodgers to anyone but Jordan Love. Jordan Love may be a really good quarterback. We don't know. But he's not Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers just had the ability to, know how to take the shots downfield. So I'm on draft cost. I am out on Christian Watson because people, I think, are still paying for that 4-game stretch. We already saw him neutralized. And with the quarterback downgrade, I don't think there's a counterpunch. And I still think his short and intermediate route running, I still think those are going to be a thing that's going to be problematic. They'll get some gadget plays. He'll have a couple big plays here and there. He'll have a couple big games. I just don't think the consistency will be there. And I think on the underneath routes, Romeo Doubs will be a possession receiver. And I think he eats up a lot of those targets. So we got to think about that as well. All right, the RotoWire Fantasy Football Draft App Kit has up-to-the-minute cheat sheet and news source that we all need when we're on the clock. If you're like me, I always do tiers, and the app lets you do that. So, again, the RotoWire Fantasy Football Draft App Kit is the #1 ranked paid sports app in the Apple Store. Check it out and see why it's #1. All right, let's go for a few more players. Bottom of the hour, Brandon Kravitz coming in. We're going to have some more good football talk here, but I have 6 more players I want to get through in 6 minutes, so I'm going to get my points on these players. DeAndre Hopkins. So, look, DeAndre Hopkins suspended the first 6 games last year. He came in, saw a ridiculous target volume. He averaged 10.6 targets. It was beautiful for him. And, of course, he cashed in. He never was a big yak guy, yards after the catch, but he was 14th percentile after the catch last year. So not quite a catch and fall guy, but real close to that. And we saw him get hurt again. Now, 2 years ago, he missed 6 games due to injury. Last year, he misses another 2 games. Now, Hopkins is into his 30s, and we talk about this all the time. When I do my research and I check out players' ages, there are very few players functioning at the highest level at running back and receiver in their 30s. It's depressing to see those numbers. And one of the things I consistently see is the inability to stay on the field. Recovery from injury is tough. Now he goes to Tennessee. Here's my worry in Tennessee. Ryan Tannehill at his best, play action slant, play action slant. That's not really DeAndre Hopkins' sweet spot. He's going to get passes. Yeah, he's DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to command some targets. If Treylon Burks is healthy, he's the slant guy. We saw from week 8 on, week 9 on, other than the concussion and the game back from the concussion, he was starting to put up those big numbers off of slants. He's a huge body in the middle of the field. They're both going to be involved, but Derrick Henry's the engine of the offense. I just don't see at where DeAndre Hopkins is getting drafted. The worry for injury, the worry for volume in that offense. They're going to keep the game slowed down. I just don't think this is the optimal scenario for DeAndre Hopkins to realize his best fantasy ability. And so therefore, I think DeAndre Hopkins is tough for me to bet on because of his situation. I still think his talent is fine. But again, at this point, he's just winning on the outside. And I don't know that Ryan Tannehill is a good perimeter thrower as it is. He's pretty good on the deep shot, but that's really not DeAndre Hopkins' game, is the possession route. And I don't know at this stage, 34-year-old Ryan Tannehill, I don't see him sticking the out routes. I just don't see him just, throwing the quick sticks out there. And that's going to be a tough one for him. Unless they revolutionize Hopkins' role, maybe. Aaron Jones is next. So last year, Aaron Jones is a borderline first, second round pick in 12-team leagues. He comes up at 1,500 yards. Now he's a fourth round pick. I don't get it. Now, to me, he completely pushed A.J. Dillon to the side. But remember, late in the year, they were splitting carries. Aaron Jones hurt his ankle. All right, so at that point, his touches were limited, and A.J. Dillon was a thing. But Jones had completely pushed him away, and Jones is clearly a much better player. No offense to A.J. Dillon, but he regressed a bit last year. Jones is still running for over 5 yards per carry. 4 times in the last 6 years, between 5.3 and 5.5. He had 213 carries last year, his most in 3 years. So when we look at Aaron Jones, we have a player who's still 97th percentile broken tackle rate, 89th yards after contact, and 65 percentile yards after catch. He is still a stud, still playing at a high level, and he is a player that we want to invest to. Brandon Kravitz, let me welcome you in. I'm finishing a couple players, but I'll ask you to kind of chip in on a couple with me, and then we'll get to the players you want to talk about today. Brandon Kravitz, he hosts the Fantasy Bites podcast over at RotoWire. He's also the host of In the Zone 96.9 The Game. You'll tell us about that at the end of the show. He's the NFL fantasy and betting contributor at FanDuel, Orlando Magic pregame radio host, and you can follow Brandon at Brandon Kravitz. His name is right on that screen. Easy to see. Brandon, tell us how things are going before we rip into this.
Man, it's crazy. I feel like as of the last 24 hours, you can just kind of feel the juice of the start of the busy season for all of us. And it makes you appreciate June and July just a little bit, but also screw those months. Let's go. Let's head deep into August. I'm ready for football season. Let's talk some names.
Man, we work so hard this time of year, but it's worth it.
It's
a buzz. It's a rush. So I'm going to cover 2 quick players I'm finishing up on, and then we're going to talk about your 4 highlighted players for today. So Travis Etienne, here's what I want to say. As a runner, he was great, over 5 yards a carry. As a receiver, 9 yards per reception. They only gave him 3 catches maximum per game last year. As a runner, there were 2 stretches. Week 8 and 9, maybe they gave him about 20-something carries. And then like week 13 and 14, they gave him more carries. But they always were looking to give other touches to other people. Then they bring in Dearness Johnson in free agency. Then they draft Tank Bigsby. To me, unless they figure out a way to use Etienne as a receiver, and he is dynamic. If they don't up his receiving work, we already see the signs. They're going to keep his rushing attempts limited. But, man, he still put up big yards last year. Over 1,400 scrimmage yards last year in really what was an inconsistent role. I am drafting him if I need a running back at that point of the draft, around 40 picks in. But I'm nervous about the not getting more receiving work. Brandon, quick thoughts on Etienne?
I agree with you completely. He's just not a guy that I find myself targeting. There are other people in that range I feel better about. The offense has you intrigued because Jacksonville should be able to put up points. You know that Lawrence and Etienne, they already have that rapport going back to their days at Clemson. So some of that stuff is built in. I'll get more into this with my evaluation of Tank Bigsby because I think that factors in to Etienne and his overall value. When you have a backup that can start to eke into some of that work, it diminishes the overall value of the starter and how much you should be willing to reach in on them.
Brandon Kravitz teased it like a pro. You know it's coming up soon, but you got to wait for it. We love that. One last player I had to finish in my segment of players in the 4th round that we're looking at, DJ Moore. So, look, before last year, it was a train wreck from a quarterback standpoint. The last 4 years, but last year was worse than ever. Before last year, Moore is at least 1157 yards per season. We know it was like before last year, it was always 4 touchdowns a season. He finally broke that curse, but he only got to 888 through the air. But here's the thing. DJ Moore can win at all levels of the field. If you get the ball in his hands and you lead him there, he's a tank. He's a running back with the ball in his hands. Now, last year, he was only 22nd percentile yards after the catch. That's not his career profile. He is much, much better than that. The Bears have to see what they have in Justin Fields. They have kind of hidden him. He didn't have weapons. They have to know this year if he's their guy. The only way to do that is to throw the ball. Moore has already established chemistry with him. I do believe we're in line for a target total near 130 to 140. If DJ Moore's getting to that, to me, his floor is 1,250 yards. I am drafting him wherever I can because I think he is way undervalued. What do you think, Brandon?
A guy that I love in PPR and standard leagues, if those still exist out there, not as juiced up about him. I don't think the touchdown totals are going to be there, but I love the talent. This is a guy that has won in every sort of way, and he's played with some bad quarterbacks during his time in the NFL. His average depth of target throughout his career has been all over the place, and yet he still produces similar totals. Justin Fields, to me, without a doubt, the best QB he's going to play with. And I still believe in Fields as a passer. I think people are sort of undervaluing him as a guy that can throw the football. At Ohio State, we didn't look at Fields the same way that we do right now, where we say run first guy who can barely throw. That's not who he was in college. So I think they'll be able to unlock that from Fields, and DJ Moore will be the beneficiary.
Looking forward to it. The reason Brandon Kravitz said he is going to tell you about 4 players who you should be targeting in fantasy drafts. And I like there are 3 specific ones. He picked them a little bit later in the draft. We always like, and then we'll have one of the steady players because we need to talk about them as well. So we're going to start out at quarterback, Brandon. So often a lot of people are going for those top 7 quarterbacks, but man, paying that freight, it's a top 5 round pick, but you could wait on quarterback, or if you're in a 2 quarterback league, we need strong options there. Aaron Rodgers, the last 3 days per Fantasy Mojo ADP is going as the quarterback 16. I bet you think that's ridiculous value. Tell us why you like Aaron Rodgers.
I can't believe it. And I can't believe it because of his name value. I mean, the fact that this guy is A, Aaron Rodgers, and B, featured on Hard Knocks, I guess not a lot of fantasy managers are buying into all of that. Last year, he finished his quarterback 14 overall. This year, he's going around, like you said, I saw him at around the 12th quarterback, anywhere between 12 and 16. But we're talking about a guy that isn't that far removed from back-to-back MVP seasons, 37, 48 touchdowns in those years. Remember, Aaron Rodgers had a hand injury last year. The perception was that he was unhappy, and largely because I would think his number 1 receiver was Romeo Doubs. And in the middle of the season, of course, Watson got going. But now he has Garrett Wilson, who is one of the better young wide receivers in the NFL. He's got a new lease on life. I wouldn't be surprised if he returns something close to MVP status. He doesn't have to get up there to give you the return on investment given where he's being drafted. Don't sleep on the old guys. Aaron Rodgers can still sling it, and he can still be a stud in fantasy because of it.
Yeah, he is an exciting player to take in that range of the draft because, like I said earlier, if the quarterbacks, there's a very big delineation between the people who are being drafted as the top 7 options and then those who are outside. And sometimes we get so focused on those top ones that we miss out on some values later. So Brandon Kravitz is telling you, buy back in on Aaron Rodgers, who is not far removed, as Brandon said, from back-to-back MVP seasons. The next player you're going to talk about, Brandon, is that running back. And look, we all need depth at running back in fantasy leagues. We're all looking for that running back who's at least going to contribute maybe flex points, and then in maybe upside for a little bit more. And then, of course, if an injury strikes, then we want more than that. Now, Tank Bigsby is going off the board in the last 5 days, last 3 days, Fantasy Mojo ADP, running back 42, pick 116. Brandon, tell us why we should be looking at Tank Bigsby in our drafts.
He's the reason we watch the preseason, the trash that is NFL preseason. You got to love what he's been able to show us. 5.4 and 5.8 yards per carry, 13 carries, 70 yards in that last game. And I don't really think stats in the preseason matter much at all, but it is a good gauge in terms of what the eye test is telling you. He looks the part of an every down back. And I think he might even be better between the tackles than Travis Etienne. Keep in mind, the current regime drafted Bigsby this year in round 3. They're making their own mark on the build of this roster. Travis Etienne, he's part of the old guard. He was drafted by Urban Meyer, and Urban Meyer was bad at this job. I don't think Etienne, part of the perception of Etienne is, well, he's a first-round running back. I don't think he would have been a first-round pick to anybody but Urban Meyer. So keep in mind, he's still a guy that you draft as an RB1, but there's a reason to be excited about Tank Bigsby, and I wouldn't be shocked if down the road they're splitting work, or if Etienne goes down, it's Tank Bigsby to the moon.
Now, Brandon, a lot of people saw Tank Bigsby's college production, and they were like, well, this isn't a good player. Auburn had like a tragically bad offensive line. Like literally, it was like unacceptable by like every potential measure. Tank Bigsby had a flawed, like say, scouting process by people because they were looking at a situation that he really had the deck stacked against him. So that said, I know Jacksonville doesn't have a world beater offensive line, especially they'll be without their left tackle on a suspension to start the season. But regardless, the things you pointed out, Bigsby, I think, is way better than his college production because of the situation. And I think you already figured out a good way to see past that. Anything you missed on Bigsby, or are we good there?
No, I think that what you just pointed out is so important when talking about Bigsby, because a lot of people dock him for that bad final season at Auburn. This was a guy, sometimes you have to go back to what did the scouts see in him coming out of high school. Tank Bigsby was supposed to be a guy that was that surefire first-round pick, the way that we're talking about Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, he didn't show that in college, so I'm not saying that he's at that level, but it could also be circumstantial that Auburn was just simply that bad and it was a bad situation for him. You never know what plays into this. Bad offensive line, injuries, maybe he was partying too much in college. The guy's a professional now. You got to go back to the way that scouts viewed him and recruits viewed him coming out of high school. It's the same reason why we love George Pickens, because he was a 5-star guy. Tank Bigsby was a stud coming out of high school. And if he returns to that, that's where those are the kind of guys I want to invest in.
And like Brandon mentioned earlier, this is an earlier segment, we remember that this team is going to share carries, especially the inside runs. So he is going to have fantasy value even when he's not the starter. You can use him as a flex. Maybe not week 1 when your roster is full of healthy players, but soon enough, you can use him. Now, the next player, Brandon, you're going to talk about, and last year, this player's draft value was really high. And then I believe it was week 1 against Pittsburgh. I think it was 2 long touchdowns, and everybody was doing victory laps. And
me included.
Yes,
yeah,
me included.
Yeah.
Yes, I won. And then by week 6, it's like, oh. Anyway, this year's going to be different. Brandon Kravitz is going to tell us why Gabe Davis at wide receiver 39, pick 87, again, last 3 days, Fantasy Mojo ADP. Why is Gabe Davis a player we're going back to at the reduced cost this year?
Yeah, he was definitely a flag plant guy last year, and I'm kind of looking at it going, you know what? I'm just going to leave the flag right where it is. He is the prototypical post-hype sleeper. We saw him blow up in the 2021 postseason and just assumed that he was going to then excel into fantasy excellence in 2022. Obviously, as you detailed, he did not. But what's actually changed for Gabe Davis? That's the question you have to ask yourself when you enter drafts. The only thing that's changed is his average draft position. He's the same guy. The Bills didn't invest in a number 2 wide receiver. I don't think Dalton Kincaid at tight end is going to take that much work away or target share from what Gabe Davis is giving you. He's not going to take over as a big play guy. He still holds his spot in the depth chart. Fantasy basics, give me the number 2 guy in a high volume pass offense with an elite quarterback and with big playability. Also, and I love this, Jim, contract year for Gabe Davis. So if he's ever going to show out, it's going to be right now.
Brandon, for some reason, I don't know why I wasn't aware of it, but a few weeks ago, it was being brought up that Davis was playing through a high ankle sprain.
Yep.
I don't think I wasn't aware it was a high ankle sprain because I don't think he missed time if at all, if much if he did. And yet, if that was the case, well, if you're a deep threat and you're relying on get off the line speed, explosiveness, that's gone.
Yep.
And if that was the problem, and then of course we have the UCL injury to Josh Allen. So between that combination, Davis was still able to score some touchdowns, but any chance in a downfield passing attack really didn't happen. Maybe Davis's ankle got better late in the season, but it wouldn't have mattered because Josh Allen couldn't throw downfield. So I'm willing, like you, I'm willing to bet on Davis because defenses, you got to worry about Diggs. And like I said, now James Cook is maybe going to be a factor in the running game. You mentioned Kincaid in the slot. There's a lot for defenses to worry about. But we know Josh Allen can buy time with the best of them. And if Gabe Davis is able to get downfield, yeah, those plays are going to be there. You're smart in saying you invest in this high-powered offense with the number 2 receiver because that usually pays dividends. And you mentioned also there's no competition for Gabe Davis. So that is a player we can keep the flag where it was, like Brandon said.
It's a little dirtier than it was last year, but it's still there. It's still in the same spot. And I think the high ankle was more of an issue early in the season. We actually saw him get going a little bit, but it was at a point where we had all decided that he was a firm bench player for us at that stage. So I don't think a lot of people reap the rewards. When we get burned in fantasy, we have a hard time forgetting, but sometimes it just doesn't work out the year that you want it to. I think this could be the year for Gabe Davis.
As fantasy analysts, Brandon, sometimes we're a year too early on a player.
Yep.
Now, not that Gabe Davis was a nobody before last year. He had done some things, but sometimes we see what we're going to eventually see. It just doesn't happen fast enough. So again, like Brandon Kravitz said, Gabe Davis is a player you should target. Now we're going to go to a player that's near the top of the draft board here, but we need to talk about these players. So Mark Andrews is going to have a lot of competition now. He was the guy. The last time he had competition, it was what, the 5'5", and I'm going to undershoot that a bit on purpose. 5'5", Marquise Brown, 5'3", whatever. I think he's 5'7", but I had to kind of embellish that. Anyway, now he has some competition. You've got Rashad Bateman, maybe ready to play. You've got Zay Flowers. You got Odell Beckham. Mark Andrews, though, you still think he's the guy you're targeting at tight end too. Tell us why we need to stick with Mark Andrews.
Yeah, so it's not like the fantasy community isn't wise to Andrews, but he's consistently the number 2 tight end off the board, as he should be. I'm not about to make the case that he should be drafted ahead of Travis Kelce, but I don't think we're truly grasping just how special his season could be upcoming. Todd Monken comes in from Georgia looking to install a similar offense to what he ran in college. And we know how these coaches work. When something works in one area, they just try and implement the same system somewhere else. And if he's looking to replicate that college success, it's going to be through the tight end position. No offensive coach brought up more plays to their tight end than Todd Monken. Brock Bowers is special. That's part of the reason why, but so is Mark Andrews. I don't think we realize just how peppered this guy is about to get with targets, trying to recreate some of that magic that they had at Georgia. So the reason why I wanted to bring him up is not because I'm changing the ranking, but I'm changing where I'm willing to draft him. He's a round 3 guy to consensus. To me, he's a round 2 pick.
So based on that, Brandon, what level of shares do you have in Mark Andrews?
I mean, I'm investing in him a lot because he's going at in an area where I'm willing to take him ahead of most. And I think that that's an important part of the draft process. As we all know, you got to figure out who you like and then don't reach too far, but reach one round ahead. And that's why, yeah, sometimes we get a year ahead of players, and sometimes in the fantasy community, we get so locked into who's my sleeper, who am I taking from round 10 and drafting in round 7. Sometimes it's really about who do you like that's going around 3 that you're willing to pluck in round 2, and that can be the difference in fantasy success. I think Mark Andrews, to me, is one of those guys, and we see tight end scarcity is part of the reason why. I don't really want to invest in a lot of these other players. It's either Travis Kelce at the back end of round 1, Mark Andrews mid round 2, or you're going to see Juwan Johnson on my roster quite a bit late in drafts. That's kind of the way I'm going.
So if we're in the same league, we're fighting over Juwan Johnson. That's for sure. Yep. Because I have a lot of shares of Juwan Johnson. Love that guy. Juwan Johnson, converted wide receiver to tight end. Took him 3 years to break out. That was always going to be the curve. He really came on in week 7 or so last year. Bunch of 50-yard games. I want to say he put up 7 touchdowns. But the thing I like in that offense, Brandon, is I think the fantasy community got distracted. They were getting a little bit on him. And then his ADP went way down after Foster Moreau came in. Understand, Foster Moreau is the blocking tight end. Juwan Johnson is going to be the seam stretcher for them. They're 2 different roles. And New Orleans is going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets because they understand Derek Carr needs protection to be successful. Last year, they were running 3 receiver sets in Las Vegas. And even though he had decent tackle play, he could throw downfield a bit, the interior was a mess. And Derek Carr was like run out of town by week 15. So that 2 tight end offense of Juwan Johnson is going to be the thing to watch. Any comments on Juwan Johnson before I let you go?
I think Derek Carr is the reason why we should love him as well. He's always leaned on every tight end Derek Carr has played with has had some fantasy value. So the fact that you're getting Juwan Johnson, maybe not anymore, because it seems like we're starting to hear his name a lot more these days, but he was free about 2 weeks ago. And then he had that nice preseason showing on that first drive. And then sometimes the thing to like even more is the fact that he didn't play in week 2. That tells you that he's solidified as a starter and somebody that they want healthy for the start of the season. Another thing to really like about any Saint that you draft is that they have a cake schedule this year. It might have the easiest schedule in the NFL. So I think they're locked to win the NFC South, and I'm sure that a number of their players will return some nice value. I had to buy back in on Alvin Kamara. He was a guy that I was completely hands-off with. 3-game suspension doesn't scare me off too much. I thought he looked fresh, and I think we're just going to – you got to think about it. Weekly rankings, Jim, like we're going to be pushing these Saints guys up because we go, oh, look, they're playing the Falcons this week. That's going to happen a lot.
Yeah, you're right about the schedule. It's very important detail on the Saints. Anybody out there, if you're watching on RotoWire YouTube, if you consider hitting the like and subscribe button, we'd appreciate it greatly if you're enjoying the show. Brandon, tell us everything you have going on so people can follow you and keep up with your work.
All right, you guys are going to have to take out a pen and paper for this one. So I host the Fantasy Bites podcast for RotoWire. That's 7 days a week. I host Monday through Friday, but you can subscribe to that wherever you download your favorite podcasts, and you can watch it just like this on YouTube as well. I usually get that posted by about between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. You can follow me at Brandon Kravitz across all platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads. I'm on all of them, so you can come and find me there. And if you find yourself in the Orlando area, I host the afternoon show from 3 to 6 p.m. on 96.9 The Game. You can also stream it on the iHeartRadio app every single weekday.
After hearing Brandon's voice, it's no stunning accomplishment that he's on radio because you definitely have a perfect voice for that, Brandon. And you bring the goods, too, which makes it even better. Brandon, thank you. No, not at all. Thank you for talking football with me today. Everyone in the audience, thanks for joining us. Please join me again Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern, where you're watching right now. My guest will be outstanding fantasy analyst and friend Dustin Ludke of Dynasty Pros and Dynasty Nerds. Have a great day, everyone.